So we are at the last few days on this calendar. Moving into the year 2666, more on that later. What do people expect this new year to be like? For me personally, I'm not seeing that many people this year are talking about this new year is going to be their year, or new year, new me, or the church is talking about claim your blessings for 2023, stuff like that. I'm not seeing that. So there must be some kind of pessimism going on in the minds of the masses. There has been so many different things going on over the past few months. So many different agendas and narratives forming that are really alarming. I often ask myself, what is the rest of the world hearing from these people? Because all I hear is the mainstream warning everyone that there's going to be problems ahead, and I have never heard them in sync with their warnings like this before.
Dana, first of all, what you hear from CEOs, I think, is a little shocking. What percentage of CEOs are expecting a recession in the next 12 to 18 months?
98%. And that's up from roughly 95% earlier this year. And CEOs have been signaling recession since the springtime in our surveys.
I watch and listen to CNBC pretty much every day because I follow the markets. And what they label as a recession in 2023 is pretty much a foregone conclusion. Pretty much the anchors, the analysts, they all expect a recession coming next year. I've never heard the mainstream all agree about problems ahead like this. Again, what the anchors are saying and the financial analysts are all saying is the same. But yet the masses still are not listening. People are still believing that things are going to be fine in the long run. I honestly don't get it, except it all being more confirmation of the strong delusion that was prophesied to be here in the last days. People's minds are trapped and locked into a false narrative and schemes that are going to lead everyone off of a cliff. Like I said, I've been watching it, but I have not focused on it, particularly within this ministry, because I've said enough about it already. I've given enough warnings. And Yah has had me on a mission of preparing his people with giving more knowledge of him. For me personally, I am able to walk in confidence as these days approach, because I am built up on him and have made him my shield and my fortress. I trust in Yah and believe that his wrath is not for me. So as I discuss my view for 2023, which is quite heavy, I believe that you need to know that those that are his will be protected and guided. He has said in his word, because you have kept my command to persevere, I also will keep you from the hour of trial which shall come upon the whole world, to test those who dwell on the earth. That's Revelation chapter 3, verse 10, and I believe it. So over the past few months, the focus has been on building up Israel in truth and understanding of Yah, so that we all gain more power in the spiritual realm, and we are covered more in our Father's arms. Most of the messages I have been given over the past few months have been heavy, and I believe that in 2023, many people will understand why. Now let me say this. What I'm about to bring up in this video is not to provoke anyone into fear. If you know that you've been placing Yah as your focus and have been making him your priority, do not stop. If you know you haven't been putting him as your priority, you better start doing it now. He has been building us up to be ready for the times ahead. We cannot change what is going on in this world. We cannot change Bible prophecy. And in order for his wonderful promises to happen, the world is going to have to go through fire. But those who have placed their hope in Messiah and have made sure that they are set apart ones, you must not live in fear. But the thing is that sometimes not living in fear often comes with a mindset of ignorance, meaning ignoring what is going on around us and not living in reality. And we must live in reality. The world is going to change regardless how many realize it or not. I personally believe that knowledge is power, and living in reality is important. The unfortunate truth is that the masses are living in a strong delusion that we should not live in. As far as the truth goes, none of us are in the rooms when these people with power are planning and devising their schemes. All we can do is review their narratives and make sure we do not fall victim to them. The amount of narratives that are completely in sync with one another is astounding. So what I want to do is inform you of how I see this next year that is upon us, in hopes that those that are truly set apart in the faith do not fall to their plans and are more proactive than reactive. There is a remnant being prepared for Yah, and I believe that all of us that truly understand our faith and live set apart lives from the ways and mindsets of this world are the ones that will come out victorious. We need to stay in reality and not fall victim to lies. Be ready for what is coming in 2023. I'll show you why. Let's begin. Okay, so 2022 was a huge setup year. It was a formulation of many different agendas that are now set to be built upon. Unfortunately, with the masses, we have a tendency to forget things that have happened after the mainstream stops reporting it. So because many events have left the news cycle, many people aren't really putting all this together and seeing these events in full perspective. I obviously can't explain everything in a short video like this, but the main points I will cover are all part of the great narrative, and this will all be used in a greater way in this coming year. Two main events that are obvious and the biggest factors that is building us all up for change that is coming are the war in Ukraine and the interest rate hikes from the world's central banks. From the war in Ukraine, we see many different scapegoats arising. We see nuclear war being threatened. We see the warnings of famine and food shortages around the world. We see an energy crisis in Europe, with many European nations not having enough gas to heat their homes. And we see the war with NATO and Russia being set up. As far as the interest rate hikes, this is something that has been happening with the central banks all over the world. But the main one that we will focus on is with the United States. Just look at this chart. This is the chart of the Fed funds rate for 5 years. Look at what has happened in just 1 year. We went from rates being at 0%, basically being able to borrow money for free for almost a decade, to now rates being between 4.25% to 4.5%, all in 1 year. We haven't lived through this type of change for 40 years. And even when it happened back then, our debt levels were never at the levels we are at right now. The United States debt is currently at $31 trillion. And just last week, Congress passed their $1.7 trillion spending bill for next year. Debt is a huge issue. I mean, it's not just government debt. There's corporate debt, personal consumer debt, local government debt, state debt. I mean, it's just debt all around the world. So in regards to the interest rate hikes, we have not seen the effects of all those actions that were taken in 2022 yet. But if anyone knows just the slightest thing about economics, you cannot give people free money for a decade and then in 1 year change the interest rate to almost 5% without there being major penalties. Besides these two factors, we have the conflict with China and the United States brewing, with much tensions over Taiwan, and that is still escalating. We also have North and South Korea escalating tensions. We have Saudi Arabia making alliances with China, making deals moving away from the United States, which is a huge deal. We have more conflict in Europe building. We can never forget Israel and Iran and Israel and Palestine, still is on the table. We have civil war brewing in the United States with the government recommending that Donald Trump is charged with a crime. And this year, the Supreme Court decides that they're going to overturn rulings like Roe v. Wade that has the country at the biggest divide we have seen since the last civil war. Not to mention other major events like the death of the Queen of England, already showing us that we are moving into a new era in this world. All of these things are all in sync for major change in the world. And if you're not aware of it and living in the reality that the world is about to go through a major shock in 2023, you are not ready. So let's talk about it. Let me just say this up front. What I expect and what I'm preparing for. Simply, I expect war, economic collapse, a new financial system built, famine, job loss, uprisings and chaos, an energy crisis, and a lack of leadership. These are my expectations. Can I be wrong? Yes, absolutely. And if I'm wrong, my life doesn't change much, except maybe a little wasted money on food. But I tell you what, if I am right, being ready for them will put me in a better place than those who are allowing these things to come upon them suddenly with no mental awareness. But either way, let's discuss the two main issues that I see coming in 2023. War and economic collapse. The narratives are set. We will start with war first. In the last 2 weeks of 2022, the rhetoric surrounding the war has been escalating, not subsiding. On the day of the winter solstice, President Zelensky of Ukraine came to the United States and made a speech before Congress. As he spoke to Congress, as well as the president, mind you, I did not hear them translate Zelensky's name into English, and And I know Zelensky used Biden's name in his language.
Mr. President, please put on the equipment. Once again, Mr. Biden.
That's for all those that believe that your name changes depending on where you go and the language that you speak. But that's another subject. Anyways, Zelensky gave a speech, and it was not a speech of reducing tensions, but it was about escalation and preparation for more on the way. The US pledged more monetary support and gave them a weapons defense system. And on the other side, the Kremlin said there is no chance of peace with Kiev after the Zelensky Washington trip. It says, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said that continued Western arms supplies to Ukraine would lead to a deepening of the conflict, something which could backfire on Kiev, he warned. The supply of weapons continues, and the range of supplied weapons is expanding. All of this, of course, leads to an aggravation of the conflict. This does not bode well for Ukraine, Peskov said. And on top of this, we have it being reported that Russia is preparing their Satan II missiles, nuclear missiles. So obviously, they are not reducing tensions, nor are they even trying to, obviously. What I expect with this conflict is some type of event that pushes NATO into it, just like they tried in November, but it was so sloppy, so they just moved on from that propaganda. What is going on is a war between Russia and Europe, and we have just not seen the escalation yet. But I am waiting for NATO to get involved, which brings the United States in. Or it could be a nuclear attack in Ukraine, something that gets the world in agreement for major war. We should also expect confrontation with China and the United States to escalate. Biden has said that China is the United States' most consequential strategic competitor.
The Biden administration calls China the most consequential strategic competitor for the United States now and for decades to come.
And this is all because of their challenge against the dollar. More on that in a sec. But the United States has been escalating tensions. Just last week, I believe it was on the day that everyone was celebrating the reborn sun god, China led its biggest incursion over Taiwan, bringing in over 70 warships in Taiwan territory.
China's military staged a massive show of force this weekend aimed largely at Washington. Dozens of Chinese warplanes and ships crossed the unofficial boundary in the Taiwan Strait. China claims self-ruled Taiwan as its own and resents any foreign interference. Beijing said the weekend maneuvers were a response to Taiwan-related provisions in the U.S. defense spending bill that was passed over the weekend.
They say they did this because in that $1.7 trillion spending package the U.S. just passed, the U.S. authorized billions to go to the defense of Taiwan. Listen, make no mistake, there will be some sort of escalation between the United States and China. And we know this because of this main reason. The main reason why the United States sits in comfort and feeling like nothing bad can happen to her is because of the dominance of its currency, the United States dollar. The dollar is the world reserve currency, and it has been able to be so for over 50 years because of the agreement it has with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia agreed to sell their oil in dollars, which made the rest of the world required to hold dollars in order to buy oil. This is why nations would buy United States treasuries. But for the first time in 50 years, this agreement is being challenged. The United States even stating they have to rethink their relations with the Saudis, which just sounds ridiculous. But now, China has worked an agreement to buy oil from the Saudis, not through the United States dollar, but through their own currency, the yuan. And the yuan is digital now. More on that soon. But they may start pricing oil in yuans next year, and they already are set up to start pricing gold in yuan as well. This is all a huge deal that the world has not seen since our current system began. The point I'm making is that the dollar is being threatened. And because of this, there is de-dollarization happening and escalating. The United States history of war has always been centered around protecting the dollar. And so if you're not expecting escalation with the country that is attacking the dollar, it is only because you're not either paying attention or you just have blind optimism. Either way, escalation between these two countries are inevitable. And as long as people are attacking the dollar, if your life is dependent upon the dollar, then there could be problems ahead. And just to add to those situations, we can add in all the other countries that are escalating war tensions all over the world.
Now to the new escalations on the Korean Peninsula. This morning, South Korea says it scrambled jets and even fired warning shots after North Korean drones entered its airspace.
Good morning, Ryan. Well, it was another brazen attack by the North Koreans in what's really been a long string of attacks this year from North Korea into the south. Now, in this latest incident, they launched 5 drones this morning that flew into South Korean airspace. One of them flew very close to the northern parts of the capital, Seoul. The other 4 were detected on the west coast. That forced South Korean officials to ground halt flights at 2 airports this morning and then launch fighter jets and attack helicopters in an attempt to bring down the drones. This is the first time the North Koreans have launched drones into the south since 2017, and the South says that this was a violation of their airspace. Brian? Well, quite recently, the North Koreans also tested 2 short-range ballistic missiles, and they said that that was in response to joint military drills by the South Koreans and the United States in that area. The North Koreans say that those kind of drills are essentially preparation for an invasion into North Korea, and that's why they take these actions. Of course, South Korea and the United States say that those drills are purely defensive drills, given how much aggression comes from North Korea. But there is obviously a lot of saber rattling going on between the 2 countries, and North Korea have launched something like 92 ballistic and other missiles this year towards the south, and that's more than they've done at any time beforehand. So they really are ramping up the pressure, and that's probably an indication that they're going to carry on in 2023 with a similar amount of tests. And obviously that comes with dire warnings from South Korea and Washington, D.C.
World War III will be a war that changes the world into a one-world government. And I expect the main catalyst that drives us into this war to start in 2023. Now, how do you prepare for war? Well, that is a difficult question to answer. If the war is on your land and it's happening around you, there's not much that you can do. And I do expect that at some point, the United States mainland to take a hit. Maybe you ask why. Well, because in much of their apocalyptic movies, they have shown this to happen. So I believe their predictive programming is for a reason. But that doesn't matter. Regardless of where war actually hits, the physical war is not what will initially hit us when the war starts. For places that the war does not actually hit, you are not preparing for the physical war, but you're preparing for the economic fallout, because that will be the first thing everyone feels. I am preparing for war and economic collapse. I've been preparing. And so I just gave you the basics of my outlook for war. But it's not war that will affect everyone in the world. It is the economic fallout that will happen that will affect everyone. And please understand, this is irregardless of if there's war or not. Now, if you've been following this channel, you obviously should know that I expect an economic collapse of this system. I've been saying this for years. And every year they have kept making the problem worse and worse by adding more debt, keeping the rates at 0. And this is the first year that they have actually changed something. And just like Donald Trump said when he ran for president,
in terms of what's going on. Now, look, we have the worst revival of an economy since the Great Depression. And believe me, we're in a bubble right now. And the only thing that looks good is the stock market. But if you raise interest rates even a little bit, that's going to come crashing down. We are in a big, fat, ugly bubble. And we better be awfully careful.
It should be understood what is going on. We have been moving through their narrative on this market. One thing we know for certain is that we are at the climax of this current financial system, and they are ready to reset it and introduce a new one. There is a catalyst that will bring it all about. And what that catalyst is the unknown variable. For me personally, I expect an escalation in these war provocations to be the factor that spins everything out of control. But that just may be too easy for them, and they may have an even more special event planned. Like, for instance, what they've been showing with this power grid attack.
News overnight, 4 power substations in Washington state vandalized, including one found set ablaze overnight, knocking out power on Christmas.
But who really knows? I don't claim to. In the end, it doesn't matter. We just know something's going to happen. What matters is that we all are in reality about our economic situation. As an example, recently I tried to have a conversation with a family member last week because it was my understanding that both her and her husband, who was like my brother, still were operating with a desire to purchase a home, hopefully in 2023, but it was not concrete. I tried to explain to her that people who are thinking about buying a home with debt at this time are not understanding the world that we're in and are not living in reality. I wanted to share my reasoning with her, but she said she didn't want to hear my view. I got a little irritated, but I moved on. It was just another realization of where this world is and where their minds are. It's so hard dealing with the people that you love and seeing them live in ignorance because they only want to see the world in the one way that they want to see it. Please know, when I say ignorance, it simply means without knowledge. It's not in a negative tone or usage that is meant to offend. Anyways, the point that I'm using with that example is that everyone that looks at the world in this way of ignorance is going to have an extremely hard time in the near future. They are going to be led by the narrative the enemy sets in when this collapse happens, while those of us in reality are going to be able to rest easy and trust Yah because we are not in darkness and following the strong delusion. Just go back to what happened during the times of COVID. Think about those that were not mentally ready. It is important that you are not pushing your own way on the world, but living in reality and making moves according to our reality and not the reality that you want to see. Is home ownership a priority at this point? I mean, if it's supported by debt, absolutely not. Now, if you're unloading cash, that's a different situation. 2022 has been the buildup of the Great Reset. I spoke about this in my video, The Great Reset. There will be a geopolitical reset, which is the Great War that I just spoke to. There is an environmental reset, which deals with climate change. There's a societal reset, which will deal with the metaverse, the social credit system, and just the different ways we will engage with each other. There will be a technological reset, which deals with many different subjects from 5G to the metaverse and blockchain. And then there will be an economical reset, which will bring in a new monetary system built around the metaverse and cryptocurrencies. What we saw in 2022 was the buildup of the narratives that will take us into 2023, preparing us for this great reset. And if you're not looking at the world in terms of it being reset, you are not ready for what's coming in this world. I am making this video before we start the new year so that you cannot be held by grand illusions. Make this clear in your head. You cannot expect things to get better until we see the outcome of them resetting the system. If you are unsure that they are resetting the system, let me show you this clearly. I've explained this in many videos, so I'm not going to go far in detail. But all we need to understand is that since the last economic collapse in 2007-2008, the way they fixed the problems was dropping rates to 0% and doing bailouts and giving away free money. The central banks of the world did this all together. It was not just the United States. So for over a decade, the world was addicted to free money. We were able to get credit cards with 0% interest rates for 3 years, very low mortgages and car loan rates. Businesses were able to take more risk and expand, buy back their stocks, all because money was cheap and easy to obtain. And this has driven up the cost of everything, which is why we have inflation. And this has also driven up debt levels everywhere in all sectors around the world. Bubbles have been created. Just think about it in putting yourself in the picture. Imagine your bank was giving you money with an unlimited credit line, and you were just using the money to make different type of investments. And your risk was low because your interest payments was very small. But what happens when the bank says, listen, we need to slow down all this activity you're doing, and then they go from 0% to 4.5% in a year's time? Your activity doesn't get hit hard at the beginning of the increase, but as the rates increase, things start slowing down for you because your interest payments are increasing. At some point, it's going to come to a halt because your income isn't keeping up with your expenses. And this scenario that we're using with you should be multiplied by billions. Because in this world, it's not only the state of the personal consumer, but small businesses, our corporations, our world governments. It's everyone. And we have not seen the outcome of what raising rates is going to do, because 2022 was just a setup year. 2023 is when we will deal with the fallout. Please understand that rates are at the highest level they have been in 15 years. If you remember, 15 years ago is when we had the last financial collapse. And the only way that you could think that it's going to turn out fine is if you feel that they fixed the financial system during those 15 years. But if during those last 15 years, they used money like it meant nothing, they raised debt levels to points we've never seen in the history of the world, they made the gap between the rich and the poor even bigger, if they never stopped the gambling in the financial system, similar to how they did with the housing market, if this is what they did during the last 15 years, and now they're adding the fastest pace of rate hikes we have seen in over 40 years, you better expect problems. Remember that in 2008, the United States debt was at 10 trillion, and from that point on, the United States was borrowing money at 0%. And even with all that free money, we had debt ceiling issues and deficits. Now the debt is at 31 trillion. In 10 years, our debt tripled. And we're borrowing money now at 4.5%. If you don't recognize there are problems ahead, you have to take those blindfolds off. The major problems aren't even in the mainstream. They're not even talking about the real problems. The real problem is not just the economy and what happens after raising rates, but it's the unspoken gambling in the markets that will absolutely shift the market. Very similar to what was happening in the housing collapse in 2007-2008. You see, let's say you put $100,000 in stocks or bonds in a firm like Morgan Stanley. They have something called buying on margin. They will be able to lend you $50,000 on margin based on the money you had invested with them. So people would literally invest money and then take loans out on their investments and often invest that money too. And that margin system worked great when the market was going up, as it has over the last decade and a half. But now that this interest rate rise has happened, and we had a down year in the stock market in 2022, and it is widely forecasted that we're going to be in recession in 2023, people won't just lose money in their personal money they invested, but they'll also lose money on the money that they borrowed, and those loans will get a margin call. And that's where the trouble will start. This gambling on investments is what I feel will be the main catalyst for the collapse. If you research the Great Depression, you'll find that this problem was a main catalyst back then as well. Very similar to how gambling on the housing market almost brought the world economy down, what they have done in the derivatives market is far more serious. Now, the real derivatives market, last time I saw, reported was over $1 quadrillion, like this article from Reuters shows. Yes, I said quadrillion. That's over trillion. 3 more zeros. That's obviously ridiculous. This is the major risk that we have, and the mainstream is not speaking on it. But they are giving us their own spin in this narrative. There is a narrative built around this, and this is what I feel is going to be the real thing that shakes up the world economy. And like I said, there's very little reporting from the mainstream on this topic. BIS warns of $80 trillion of hidden foreign exchange swap debt. BIS is the Bank of International Settlements. It is the central bank of the central banks. This is where the real power of the world economy is located. This article is from Reuters, written on December 5th, 2022. The Bank for International Settlements, BIS, has warned that pension funds and other non-bank financial firms now have more than $80 trillion of hidden, off-balance sheet dollar debt in the form of foreign exchange swaps. Dubbed the central bank to the world's central banks, the BIS raised the concerns in its latest quarterly report. Its main warning, though, was what it described as the foreign exchange swap debt blind spot that risked leaving policymakers in a fog. You see, they're calling it a blind spot, which is a very big thing. This is a very big issue, and I believe personally that this will be what sets the world economic system off its legs. But again, this is just my speculation based on how big this problem is. Regardless of what it actually is that brings it all down, I just know that it's something that will bring it down, and it is unavoidable. And what they often like to do is use something to say that nobody could have predicted it. And that's why I believe that this blind spot that they're talking about will be part of it. Either way you look at it, none of us could just be sitting with our eyes closed and living in some fake reality like these things don't exist. We must be prepared for a massive problem, worse than what we saw in 2008. Something comparable or similar to the Great Depression. Because unlike in 2008, when they were able to fix the problem by adding more debt and lowering interest rates, when they try that solution, and they will, it will only make matters worse. You cannot fix a debt problem with more debt. In the end, this solution is unsustainable, and we are at the end of this problem. So, okay, what do I expect? Quite simply, a collapse in everything. That's why it's a great reset. No jobs, supply chains will stop, so there will be no food or other products like toilet paper. I expect bank runs, which will lead banks to close and restrict people's access to their money. No one should ever believe that the banks are actually holding your physical money in these little local institutions that you see around the corner. I expect protests and chaos in the streets all over the world. I expect massive chaos so they can bring in their order. I will explain their order, but listen, I am not making this content to place fear in you, but just so that you live in reality and are ahead of the game. Being prepared for it spiritually first, then mentally, and if you're able, physically. I have a list in the description box of ways you can be prepared for this collapse, and I have made a few videos on the subject. This is not about fear, but living in reality. And the only people that will tell you there is nothing to see here or don't concern yourself with this are the people not paying attention. If the mainstream is even telling everyone they're expecting a recession in 2023, that is a nice way of saying, we see problems coming in 2023. Be ready for them. So listen, if the mainstream is warning of a recession, if you are not prepared for problems, that will be on you. So I've mentioned all these problems, and maybe you're asking yourself, especially if you're new to this channel, what is the point of all this? Why are they creating all these problems? Well, these people move with agendas in order to create their new world system. They need to destroy and reset this old one so they can bring in the new one. And so if you're preparing to thrive in their old system, you have already lost. This system we are in is going away. I don't know how to be any clearer about that. And you need to at least understand where this world is heading, because just like people were not ready for COVID and they were led by fear all the way until they took multiple doses of an unknown solution, all these millions of people falling for the order created from their chaos. This next situation will be much worse when everything stops. And if you're ready for it, you will know not to be led in the same direction that everyone else is going. You will know that when you see everyone going this way, you'll know that you must be set apart and go the opposite way and hold out. We will be witnessing herding of people who will have no hope and be led to accept whatever solution is being given to them. And I believe that the COVID situation proved just how much the masses will follow the herd. It's hard to make a video explaining all of this in depth in this short amount of time. This video is already long. We are talking about multiple agendas, many different narratives, all being combined into one main agenda that is collapsing and resetting the world. And what should be expected from all of this is their new system. Well, the beginning of it at least. I made a video about this years back, that they are changing our money. Well, here it is. Let me show you concretely. When this system cracks open, and all the traditional methods that the governments and central banks normally use to intervene don't work, these governments and central banks will introduce their solution and herd everyone into it because people will have no choice. The next phase before we have a world currency is the world central banks all switching to digital currencies, CBDCs. Now, maybe you heard a little bit about central bank digital currencies. Maybe you heard that the Federal Reserve was in a testing phase. But maybe you don't really know that this system is already in place and ready to be implemented. For instance, look at this white paper from the company MasterCard. Yes, MasterCard, the credit card company. This was written about a year ago, January 2022. It shows they are already prepared and ready to work with the CBDC system. It says, central banks have played a vital role in the financial system as the key source of trust underlying monetary systems around the world for hundreds of years. In response to global trends and local needs, many central banks are now evaluating the benefits and challenges associated with offering a retail central bank digital currency, CBDC, for the general public to use in day-to-day payments. Indeed, 86% of central banks report that they are actively weighing the merits of a CBDC for their economies. It's clear. What I'm trying to show you is that this new system is already here. The central banks of the world are already preparing for the general public to use this. It's just waiting to be implemented. Let me show you even more evidence. This website right here is called cbdctracker.org. On their website, they explain themselves by saying, numerous countries are investigating and implementing their own versions of central bank digital currencies, CBDC. CBDC represents a new form of electronic money that, unlike well-known cryptocurrencies, are issued by a central bank of certain countries. CBDC 2.0 is the second step in the evolution of CBDC, issued digitally by one or many central banks using blockchain technology, interoperable and programmable by design. News and updates in this area arrive every day from different sources, and makes a hard task for economists or enthusiasts to track the status and analyze historic trends. CBDC Tracker is an open source project aimed at providing a comprehensive information resource for world CBDC initiatives. So this website tracks all the movement going on with the CBDCs. Now listen, this topic by itself is massive, and I cannot go in depth on it in this video. If it seems that more people need clarification, I will try to expound on this in a separate video. But listen, what I'm trying to display here is that this system is built and ready to come online, and this website, CBDC Tracker, will concretely show this. Look at it. You see this map? This is a map of the central banks that are currently working and testing CBDCs. Some are in research like the United States, others in proof of concept, which is basically designing it before the pilot. Then there's the pilot and the launch. The Bahamas was the first country to launch their own CBDC. You would think that these things are widely known from the mainstream news, but this not. Bottom line is that the world central banks are all working on a new financial system. It's far from secret, but very much not known in the public eye. They are telling us they are doing it without providing clarity. There is a massive amount of information on this subject out there, too much for people to live in denial or be asleep about this. But unfortunately, people are. Like with my family member. How can you think about buying a house with debt when they are literally planning on changing the whole system? Knowledge is power, and the reason most people have no power is because they reject knowledge, and therefore are destroyed like Hosea prophesied. Ask yourself, what does this mean when all the central banks in the world are working on creating a new financial system that they are very vague about, while at the same time, central banks are raising interest rates, pushing economies into recessions, while debt levels are increasing at enormous scales like the United States debt, while countries are at war and war is being provoked. When you see all this happening, while at the same time they're quietly building a new financial system, where's your mind at? The world is not in a good place, and in the year 2666, I do expect to see something come from it. Yeah, so why do I say 2023 is 2666? It's just because I understand these people's symbology. They love that number 23. Divide 2 into 3 and you'll see why. Yeah. This is the world we live in. And being that this world runs off numbers and math, I do expect them to make a move. The expectation is that after things plunge into chaos, and then people demand change and the government to do something, the central banks of the world will offer a solution and start providing their citizens a guaranteed basic income that will bring people into their system piece by piece. And all of those not grounded in their faith will walk right into the system. They're going to give people pennies on the dollar, transferring whatever dollars you have, not all of them, mind you, into the CBDC. Your pensions, everything will be transferred in the CBDC, and people will be getting guaranteed basic income. Those that do not live set-apart lives will be led to follow these people into this system and will lose any last hope they had in Yah while putting their trust in the governments and the bankers of the world that will lead them down an even darker path. And while we, as Israel, need to be ready for Yah to bring us back from all the nations we have been scattered in, we must make sure that we are not living a life attached to a system that is systemically seeking to oppress and enslave us. Once the collapse sets in, the world will be changed forever. And it's up to each and every one of us to live in reality and be actively prepared to depend on Yah. We should always depend on Yah. We should be ready to withdraw from this world and remove their control from our lives. As we head into this new year, you should be expectant of a great narrative that brings along a great reset. And you will see many different stories that all seem separate, but they are all intertwined in order to bring us into their planned changes for the world. We've all heard about a new world order, but if you don't see all the conditions set in front of us right now, ready to bring us into this reality, you are living in a dream world. And when the time comes, you will be taken advantage of. Do you really think that this reporting about the tax on the power grids are just random? Do you think that the expectations for famine and food shortages in 2023 were about nothing? Do you think that IMF expectations for a global recession will mean very little for you? Do you think that it's a coincidence that in Israel there is a man claiming to be the Messiah? Now note, I do not believe this is the false Messiah that will bring the world together, which is why I haven't discussed him. Either way, if you think that all these things that are happening are inconsequential and you are ignoring the world around you, you will not be ready for what is coming. Plain and simple. For the past few months, I've been making videos on difficult topics because Yah has been placing an urgency in me that it is time that everyone gets serious about their faith and be set apart from this world. From Messiah's true name, to reviewing how we are worshiping celebrities, to understanding more about what will be happening in the end times, understanding between the wheat and the tares, understanding Israel and end times prophecy, the understanding of being set apart, and we'll have more on that soon. If we're going to have any chance of coming through what's coming, it will only be through Yah's strength. All of this, while it seems secular, is just a grand illusion to bring about fulfillment of Bible prophecy. And there are only two paths, two completely different paths that the world is being led on. Two. One path is into despair and lack of hope, being led into a new world order, and the other path is being covered and protected by Yah and being part of his prophecy and promise that he will gather Israel from all nations he scattered and then rejoin them into their land. And this is for all of Israel, grafted in, natural or wild. There are two paths the world is walking down. And the sad thing is that the majority are walking down the path into the New World Order. And I made this video to implore you to wake up and set yourself apart from the ways and the mindsets of this world and be a set apart people to Yahuwah. Do not let his day come upon you like a thief. But concerning the times and the seasons, brethren, you have no need that I shall write to you. For you yourselves know perfectly that the day of Yahuwah so comes as a thief in the night. For when they say peace and safety, then sudden destruction comes upon them, as labor pains upon a pregnant woman, and they shall not escape. But you, brethren, are not in darkness, so that this day should overtake you as a thief. You are all sons of light and sons of the day. We are not of the night nor of darkness. Therefore, let us not sleep as others do, but let us watch and be sober. For those who sleep, sleep at night, and those who get drunk are drunk at night. But let us who are of the day be sober, putting on the breastplate of faith and love, and as a helmet the hope of salvation. For Elohim did not appoint us to wrath, but to obtain salvation through our Adon, Yahusha the Messiah, who died for us, that whether we wake or we sleep, we should live together with him. Therefore comfort each other and edify one another, just as you also are doing. That's 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verses 1 through 11. It is important that we all start abiding in the truth and living set-apart lives in Yah. He is literally our only hope in this world. And if you're not watching as he told us to do, and you're not living awake, but living as one who is asleep, his day will come upon you unexpectedly. What is happening in this world is not good, but living in ignorance of it is not the answer, because you will not be ready when sudden destruction comes upon them all. He is giving us all these signs and clarity of danger because he is allowing us to be ready and not be overtaken. Are the events that are coming heavy? Absolutely. But if we live with our trust in Yah and depend on Him to keep His promises and fulfill His word, you will see that these events that are coming are not for those of us who are set apart, but it is a test for those who have been living tied to this world system. He is testing the whole earth, like He said. So I am making this video as a warning that you'll receive on these last couple of days of 2022, that in 2023, be set apart and set your mind on Yah. Be ready spiritually, mentally, and physically for the changes that are coming, and do not be led by fear but by the Spirit of Yah as this new world begins to form. Do not live in ignorance, but in reality, and praise Yah that He does not have you like the rest of the lost ones in this world that will be led into the arms of the devil, blind without a clue of what's actually happening. If you have watched this video, that does not have to be you. Be set apart and be ready. What is coming in 2023 is just leading us up to living amongst our true King, and Yahuwah has prophesied to preserve us while it is coming. Do not allow fear to move you, but only be moved by His Spirit and His call upon your life. If you've been watching these videos for the past few months, there has been a plan here. You have been built up to be prepared for what is coming. And if you just hold on to your faith and make sure you are living in His word, feeding on it daily, reading it like your life depends on it, you will be steered into His kingdom and away from the traps and snares that are coming. Do not fear 2023, but be expectant of the troubles that are ahead. Be proactive and not reactive, and depend upon Yahuwah to get you through it. We cannot ignore these things, but now that you are aware, you can now be spiritually and mentally ready. As we go into 2023, go into it in prayer. Make that last day on this calendar be done in prayer and in worship. You don't need to be out there partying. Start the first day of the year on the calendar in prayer and worship. You don't need to be out there partying. End the year in prayer and worship and start it the same way. You will be ready for what is coming. Keep your eyes fixed on Yah and be ready. Be blessed. Hallelujah. Praise Yah. Okay. Thanks again for watching. If this has blessed you, please make sure to like it and share it with others. If you haven't done so already, please make sure you subscribe to this channel. Elohim willing, I upload every Friday. Don't forget to follow this ministry on Facebook and Instagram, as well as on my website, Truthunedited.com. I really would like to give a special thank you and shout out to those who have donated and continue to support this ministry. I'm so thankful for the love of our Father, and I thank you for your obedience to His call in your heart. I'm humbled by your support, and I'm very thankful for you. You know who you are. I sincerely thank you. Be blessed. Okay. Thanks again, everyone, for watching. I love you all.